Hey, good morning, all. So grateful for you finding time to hang with us today. Uh, Monty Roulier is joining us and the CI team just to help do some light facilitation as we go through this session. And looks like, we've got a good group on the line. And I'm going to turn it to Nicole, perhaps to just like do our land acknowledgement, and then Monty will talk about kind of how we're thinking about this next hour plus for you.
All right, thanks, Liz. I will start with our land acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging with humility that the land where we are today is the territory of the people of the Salish Sea. Their presence is imbued in the waterways, shorelines, valleys, and mountains of the traditional homelands of the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. And as usual, we'll put this in the chat box. All of you are encouraged to see which land you are on today, and that resource is one we refer to quite a bit. All right, pass it back over to Monty and Liz.
Well, good morning, everyone. This is Monty Roulier and with the Community Initiatives team, and always great to join you all. And so as this slide suggests, we have a little bit of a game plan for how we can spend this hour-ish time, and also, really see this as a particularly informal meeting, with almost the term office hours. So we want to make sure that there's time for you to kind of either ask questions, throw out ideas as we kind of begin this journey around what the cohorts could look like. And so as it suggests, we're kind of grounding this in our larger learning journey, kind of introducing the collaborative action network. Some of you, or all of you in some ways, really contributed to what this could look like last year. And now we're in the beginning stages of starting to really operationalize that and to lean into that. And wanted to provide a little background. So Nicole and Liz are going to do a little bit of a level set and reminder of that. And we would love to just invite any and all voices, and in particular had a little bit of some informal exchanges with Yuki Yang and Jim Reinhardt, and I believe Nicole Picknell, who have some experience and have said yes to kind of how they might be moving forward with the cohorts. And just wanted to signal to them that we would love to maybe hear your experiences around where you've been so far at the cohorts, where you're hoping to maybe go with those. And of course, there's a number of cohort options that are starting from scratch. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and just have an open discussion. I'm not able to see my chat because I'm not on my typical computer today, but again, just invite folks to, if they haven't started to, maybe that's happening, just your name and your connection, the land acknowledgement land you're on right now would be terrific. So for the next bit here, I would love to just pass it back to Nicole and Liz to remind us kind of how did we get here, and what's the context for these cohorts within this collaborative action network.
Great, thanks, Monty. And just if you wouldn't mind just in the chat box putting your name, your organization, and whose land you're on, that'd be great. It'll be our version of kind of doing a round the table set of introductions of who's all joined us today. So I'm hoping this visual is not new to any of you, but if it is, it's something that we worked on throughout probably the latter part of 2019 into the early part of 2020. And we were trying to come up with something to replace, the 12-page documents that everyone has of what's the ACH about and what are we trying to accomplish, and worked with, an amazing group that kind of listened to 3 days of conversation from the board at a partner session that really had probably about 175 people, and then working with our team, And they came up with this visual describing our region. And, you know, on another moment, I can tell you that there's just like meaning to every piece of what's on this visual, from the trees to, you know, the tribal logos that are on each of the cedar trees, the importance of those trees, the waterways, the canoe, like everything that's on here has a deeper meaning. But on, you know, the one side, kind of the strategies that we had talked about with our board of what we would be doing after the Medicaid transformation project. And on the other side, just some grounding kind of tenets that guide our work, starting with honoring tribal sovereignty here in the region and being led by community voice, you know, connecting with you all, the notion, you know, that we've introduced over the last couple of years about the vital conditions for well-being, and then the work of the Othering and Belonging Institute and targeted universalism in this notion of fostering belonging across the region. So this is what we came up with. It has guided how we have thought about 2022 for about a year and a half as we've inched our way here. And really it's what is taking us into this next space. And I almost wish, Monty, I don't know if you included it anywhere in the slide deck, you know, at some point I want you to talk about that, the liminal space concept, because, you know, that I think that's really shaping a lot of what's coming forward. So Stacy, if you have the slides, if you could go to the next slide, we appreciate that. So we have just finished at the end of 2021, 5 years of being part of a Medicaid transformation project, a waiver that the federal government gave to the state of Washington to try and focus on how we transform really the healthcare delivery system. But as you see in that statement, you know, we moved from having a mission statement that was about improving health across the 5 counties to a statement that the board adopted at the end of 2022, like our reason for being, that we exist to advance a just and inclusive culture and the necessary conditions required for all community members to thrive. And so we're really moving from this focus on metrics and measures and clinical strategies to shifting on how do we actually get to equitable well-being? How do we move to a way for us to all operate together in concert to get to all people and places thriving? Go to the next slide. Thank you. And so we have, and Nicole's going to just talk a little bit, you know, many of you have already signed these agreements, but we were able to put something together that we felt actually laid out kind of the parameters and the construct of what we'd be asking partners in this year. So we're moving from like having contracts with partners because you have committed to certain projects or certain target populations or certain initiatives to really saying like what we want to do is to bring people together because we're in agreement around the ends that we're trying to reach around equitable well-being, and laid out some beliefs, some strategies, some principles that we shared with partners 3 times last year between the spring and into late summer, and your comments evolved that into the language that became part of the contracts. And just reminding that today we're still like starting with those folks who've been in contract with us for the last 3+ years. But we are hoping by early in the second quarter this year, we're going to be expanding this network to people who haven't been in contract with us. And we actually have got, you know, 50 to 100 smaller organizations sitting out there waiting to see how they can become part of the ACH work. Go to the next slide. Oh, and this is where I'm going to shift it to Nicole, just to talk about this language that we put together. We're thinking of this as what are kind of the sideboards for the Collaborative Action Network. So Nicole, can I shift this to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so as Liz's two previous slides are showing kind of this evolution, and what I like about where we've landed with the guiding principles is that I was making notes, and all those who know me know I take terrible notes, but I've got words all over this page. And where what's really impressive to me about where we've landed is that the guiding principles have been driven by conversations with many of you on this call, the work that's been going on the last 4 years of, really what are the beliefs and values in how we do our work? How can we hold ourselves accountable in how we approach this work? So it's like the thread, or it's the map. It really is this collective action, stronger together. And really that we've been learning that these are the important principles of how we approach this work. And so those of you who have seen the contracts for next year, this is our Exhibit A, which these are, again, principles that they shouldn't be of surprise. We've talked about them one-on-one. We've had retreat, our summer retreat with y'all that was virtual, where we leaned into this a little bit more to understand, like, are we hitting these right guiding principles? And then Stacey, if you don't go on the next slide. We've got a continuation of shared beliefs. Again, how are we approaching this work? What are we collectively working upon? When we have many of our equity conversations, we talk about accountability. And accountability can also come from some shared beliefs. And so the way we approach this work is really important. And I'm just, the team has spent time looking at this. This really drives our internal work, how we approach our work. And I would say also these shared beliefs of leaning in more with specific language. And I'm going to go ahead and call out inherited legacies of systemic racism that have perpetuated trauma and exclusion, particularly among Indigenous populations and communities of color. Really being more specific. I think we transitioned maybe a year ago from health equity to equity and racial justice, and adding language that really has more meaning behind it. And if you want to go to the next slide. And then starting to get a bit more specific within our commitments. These are, again, driven by what we've heard and seen in partner reporting, candid conversations around, like, kind of maybe candid and honest conversations of, like, what is the important work that we're doing. I think also what you're seeing is a result of our, I might go ahead and call our collective trauma of how we've all been impacted by the last 2 years of the COVID pandemic, and the recognition that things were not working before the pandemic, and there's not that we don't want to go back to some of those things. And so really leaning in more around kind of this adoptive shared action, learning framework, working together on things. And so this is these last three slides are sort of I would say a collection of conversations and stories, and really where we see ourselves as a action network moving forward. And so I'm going to go ahead and hand that back to Liz, and we're going to keep sharing, again, informal, but this is, for those of you who have seen the contract, this is what your first page of your contract looks like.
Yeah, so I don't know if there are any other slides. I know that we have more, but really wanted to also create some space for you to be able to ask questions, knowing that the contracts go to certain people that may or may not be the people who are actually on the call today. So whether you've seen the contract language or you haven't seen the contract language, it's really why we spent so much time last year kind of walking through how we were thinking about the Collaborative Action Network with you all. And it could just be somebody else who's actually seen that in the contract itself. So, partly, Monty, I may just again, ask you if you want to kind of jump in here and see how we can get some information from folks who've joined the call today.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz and Nicole. And, as you suggest, some of that may be a little bit new territory for some folks on the call. And, for others, you were actively a part of this process. So I'm kind of monitoring the chat. I would, we could certainly move into some breakouts at some point. We weren't sure who all was able to make this call. And it's always amazing to see amidst this really busy time that 70 of you are here to kind of think about how we build this and move it forward. So, at some point, Liz and Nicole, I'd love to, if you all wanted to share a little bit more about the cohorts when we bring Yuki and Jim and potentially Nicole in a little bit. But yeah, maybe we just pause there and see if there's some comments or questions, things that, again, are reminding you that you're excited about as you kind of hear the context of what we're creating together. And maybe if I could get a little bit of help looked like there was a couple of comments or questions that were coming through.
Yeah, and one other thing that I might add, I think it was last week, I just actually can't tell anymore, that, Monty, you shared a slide with us about the liminal space.
Mm-hmm.
And, what we are aware of, we're asking partners and individuals across the region maybe to take a little bit of a leap of faith with us. And because what we're all used to, a contract that is it's all lined up. Here's what you need to do. Here's the deliverables. Here's the markers. Here's the measures. And so what you're signing when you sign it. You know exactly what's expected of you. And the way we've been approaching 2022 is in this period of co-design and co-creation that we want to have a way of having you all lead, whether it's influencing, leading, making decisions. Those are really hard to put in a contract when what we're asking you is to actually co-create and co-design what are the outcomes that we want to try and get to. And so I know that the slide that you just used to describe the liminal space got added to the slide deck, and I don't know if we can pull that up. And then Marco on our team added this concept, and I hope I pronounce it near to close to correct, of Nepantla, and that it's also like a word that describes being in the middle of or kind of being in between things. And, part of what we'd like to do with you in this year is to go from something that was really prescribed to something where you get to decide what comes next. And knowing that that's hard and that you all want answers to questions and you want to know about sustainability and you want to know, what's going to be, expected at month 6 versus month 9. And so I appreciate that because know that our team asked me very much the same questions. But Monty, I didn't know if you wanted to just describe this concept and why it at least resonated for all of us.
Yeah, we kind of talked about this with some of the North Sound staff and team, which is amazing and growing. And some of and I'll get to meet some of the others. And this notion of liminal space, some of you may be familiar with it, is kind of part of the perennial wisdom and tradition and love. I don't know if Marco's on it. Someone would love to hear his voice as he kind of brought really an adjacent term that comes from, some indigenous wisdom that he's had access to. And so liminal space is, I'll just read this. Liminal space is a space that lies between the known and the unknown. It is a transitional space of heightened intensity that we experience when we traverse the threshold of the creative unknown. And, liminal space, some would suggest it doesn't always, it's not always there. We might experience it individually, but collectively, there's only certain periods of time often where we're in this liminal space, and it can be used as a really generative time as we kind of leave behind parts of the past and start to create something new. And so in many ways, this journey that you all are on collectively feels very much like a liminal space, that there's opportunities and some are more comfortable, as we kind of noted with the staff and, probably among your families. Liz, you were kind of joking that you've spent a lot of your time in liminal space. You're pretty comfortable with high degrees of ambiguity, and not all of us are there, but there's an opportunity for us to lean in together. And just to double click on this idea that this is really a co-creation process. I think Other and Belonging Institute, John Powell, talks so beautifully around what is different around co-creation, and what you all have described in terms of your commitments and your values. And I'm kind of curious, if there's any comments or people want to even talk about what does liminal space look like for you all. And maybe we can kind of hold on to that concept as we maybe pull in Yuki and Jim to even talk a little bit about their experiences as they're moving from what was in their Medicaid transformation world, and kind of what feels like it's maybe on the threshold of being created through their work, if that's okay. So again, welcome thoughts on liminal spaces, and we may just kind of open this back up, or even Liz, we could even spend a little time in small groups for a moment.
Yeah,
But
that might be a great way to start, because I know that I'm staring at like screens of names, and we just didn't know how many folks would join today. And let's see, Natalie, are you like our super user today?
yeah, co-creating on the fly. So Natalie, maybe if we could put folks into groups of 3 or 4, and the question before we maybe come back to a little bit more concrete on the cohorts is, as you're reflecting on this and this kind of spirit of liminality, how are you coming into this kind of in-between space? What is it that kind of is jumping out for you as we're co-creating this work? And what big curiosities or questions, either with the contracts or joining the cohorts, are coming up for you? So Natalie, on the fly, if you could do your magic again. Welcome back. Hopefully, trust it's always nice to connect with kind of your peers and co-conspirators, co-creators and co-conspirators in this network. And let's just take a moment, would love for folks, if you're willing to come off speaker, and we can handle the messiness of speaking over each other for a moment. Or if anybody would like to raise hand to kind of what was coming up from you, would love to just maybe start with one of the bigger things. What's surfacing you and around this, the big opportunities, as you're kind of being reminded from Liz and Nicole around where we're heading. And then we'll move into kind of what are some of the more nuts and bolts questions or curiosities that you might have. So
Can I nominate somebody?
please.
I want Melissa to talk about Star Trek. Go. It was just so great. It was like all of a sudden I'm like the captain of a starship,
All right, I'll do it. So I will preface this with I've been watching way too much Star Trek lately, so I apologize in advance, but I can't not make a Star Trek like metaphor out of this whole thing. Really the way that I envision the liminal space is, the ACH is kind of our Starship Enterprise, and Liz is our Captain Picard, and she's helping facilitate just like traveling through this vast space, making all of these connections with people with very different, ways of being and very different approaches to all of the different issues that we're solving, and bringing us together to really like create a prime directive out of all of these different diverse perspectives. And that space is terrifying and exciting, and nobody knows how to solve the issues in our communities, whether it's access to justice or access to housing or solving food insecurity or whatever our directive is. Nobody understands that better than we do and the people that we serve, right? So that's kind of just what was coming up for me.
Yeah. I see some other beating heart Trekkies that seems like a really apt metaphor for how we're traveling through. What other metaphors or things that are coming up for you as you're thinking about this liminal period, this liminal space? I see Julie had a nice comment before. Please.
I can say in our group, it was interesting. We ended up with a number of us in the kind of medical backgrounds, medical field. And so we kind of acknowledged how uncomfortable it is to be in this unknown and transitional space. And we like things predictable and kind of know where we're going and checking boxes. At the same time, I think we also understood and understand the value of not being check boxy and being able to think outside the box. But yeah, I think there was a common thread there about, oh, we like to have things way more predictable and known, and you know, so it's a stretch for at least most of us on this.
Thank you so much for giving voice to that. You know, this little bit of discomfort that came up with some of the staff member teams too, the different level. Was there anything that came out of your conversation around where you see opportunities in this kind of transition space? So what you're excited about?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Gosh, those of you who were in this with me, speak up, but I don't know. I think it's just so new. For myself, I'm not sure yet. I think there's always opportunities when you're working with groups that are kind of all working on the same thing. So
yeah.
We talked about it being an opportunity instead of looking at it as being a confinement. When there's not a set of strict guidelines or metrics around something, that the sky's the limit. And so sometimes when you have those metrics or guidelines, you may just meet status quo. But if you don't have that, more than likely you'll go above and beyond of what the baseline is. So the opportunity is probably much greater by not having that box to be checked in.
Thank you.
Our group echoed the kind of comfort with prescriptive contracts with defined measurement. We had Nika, who's awesome at measurement and designing systems. But one of the things that I brought up is that those things don't afford a lot of creativity. And so while this may feel unsettling and a little bit new, it could be a spark of creativity. And I brought up for us, working regionally is one of the great benefits, has been one of the great benefits through the transformation program. The problems we deal with are so regional in nature or wider than that even. And so I just look for more creative opportunities to do out of the box solutions, because obviously what we've been doing hasn't been creating the thriving conditions we want. So, you know, this type of model is maybe exactly what we need to do, because it's different, because it will afford opportunities for us to connect across our different organizations, service territories, you name it, languages, all of that. And so, I don't know, I'm hopeful.
Thank you so much. The others, what was surfacing for them?
I would echo that, Mike. I think this is a really refreshing opportunity to do something different, and to, you know, partner with others around solutions that we come up with together and then be in action. And I think Connie and I mentioned, you know, how exciting is it to actually execute and, you know, fail fast if we're going to fail, but move the dial forward. So that we can learn and, you know, try new things and be in action. So super exciting about that.
I would chime in that the Communities of Color Coalition has, since our inception or our first meeting with Liz, has always operated and functioned in this manner. It has been one that we have been searching and thriving for And as a result of it, from an organizational standpoint, our organization has grown immensely and become a true force in the region because of that flexibility. It is because we can shift and pivot from this to that. I know that in the medical field, it may be more of a challenge because you do have a lot of processes that you really can't deviate from. I do not think that we should all of a sudden start having the podiatrists go in and start doing open heart surgery. I don't think that we're going to do something like that. But at the same time, some of the processes, when you're talking about the focus is about people and trying to get out of the systematic ways of doing things where it is all linear sequential, because it is that linear sequential process that many times will not allow us to deviate. And in this way, we're getting outside of that box. And I think that those that truly embrace this will see a dramatic difference in the way that they function and operate.
I'm curious if either Jim Reinhardt or Nicole Picknell are on. Partly, I was sharing the story of a call that we had to talk about like community resource paramedicine and how that fit in with the cohorts, and would just love their thoughts, because I think the way I described it is the most of the call was like how this wasn't a fit, and it felt really uncomfortable and unknown compared to where we ended the call. So Jim or Nicole, are you on?
Yeah, Liz, I'm on.
Hi, Jim.
Hi. Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Reinhardt. I'm the Chief Medical Officer and the Community Resource Paramedic for the Tulalip Bay Fire Department. Our fire department serves the Tulalip Indian Reservation. And as far as I can tell, I think that we're probably the only fire district that's wholly encapsulated in a sovereign nation. I've, for my part, have a little bit of experience with dealing with indigenous populations and some of the depths of the problems. And Liz is right. The call that we had, I had to kind of share a real honest appraisal of our participation in the ACH and in the Medicaid transformation project, and some of the things I still kind of feel are aren't real positive. I will say this though, the depth of knowledge of the people in the North Sound ACH, like in this room, is staggering, and I just have the utmost of respect, because you guys are out there doing a really difficult thing. For our part, and from my perspective, having been involved with the Medicaid transformation project, it seems that there was a bit of mission drift from its initial goal, and now we're we're aiming at a greater emphasis on equitable well-being. I think that was even the phrase. And so I'm a little bit guarded about continuing on, because I feel that I don't know what's really going to be involved in this. Like Liz used the phrase, a leap of faith, and we're in. But there are a few things that I think were not very efficient as far as helping our program along. And one of the things actually is breakout sessions with, albeit very bright and talented people, but breakout sessions with people whose scope of work has no relevance whatsoever to what we're doing. That's not a real efficient use of our time. So I was a little bit cautious about continuing on. There is a lot of things that I think that we can accomplish in the time ahead, but I also think that at least as far as the mobile integrated healthcare, community paramedicine, I think that we need to approach it with a much different perspective. And so there it is.
Would it be fair to say you were pessimistic?
Yeah, I don't know that it'd be fair to say that I was pessimistic. I became a little bit pessimistic. There, to have an open and honest conversation. That's what we really need to do, because otherwise, why are we even doing this? We need to ask some real hard questions. And one of the questions that I had to ask, and of course my board of fire commissioners and our fire chief have to ask, is what is the ACH doing to help us? Jim, why are you spending all this time dealing with the ACH? What have they done? And of course, we're part of the financial distribution of funds, of that Medicaid transformation funds, but largely we really haven't gotten a lot of assistance, at least as far as I can tell. And I think that can change. And maybe that's a lot of that's on me for not being able to identify where that assistance can be, obtained with the ACH. But that kind of made me a little bit sour on it. But I am optimistic. I am like a hopeless optimist. But I would also ask that Captain Picknell, that Nicole, she chime in, because I have not a lot to add right now.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, Liz. So I love this conversation because we were kind of having this in a small group, right? So like when you talk about medical, we do live in a world in the fire service, we're paramilitary, right? So my whole life, 30 years, I lived by a protocol, a policy, a guideline, you name it. And when you go from being on the line on an engine, everything is done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and do it this way, or you're gonna mess up your career, right? So you move into this space of a community resource paramedic where now I serve the public in a different capacity and I get to be creative. And it took me a good 1.5 to 2 years to go, it's okay to think outside the box and ask for forgiveness later. That took a long time to be comfortable with that, because this space is different. The person's needs in front of me aren't like, go to the hospital, this is what we do, right? So it's really hard. And when I first started Sound ACH, I had a little yoga, massage therapy, leadership background that wasn't the fire service. So I first walked into Sound ACH and I said, okay, please don't be offended when I say this, y'all were a little bit woo-woo. like that's what came across my mind. I was like, they're talking about big words like lumini, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? Oh, sorry. I was like, what the hell is that? And then I was like, oh, I get this. This is my other space that I live in, where we get to be really open-minded to the possibility. And but it took a long time to be comfortable with that. So when Jim speaks, I'm like, yeah, I totally get what Jim's saying. And I didn't start from the very beginning. That was Chief Maxwell. So I come along and I realized in our convenience, I was like, I don't think this is for everybody. Because we would do yoga and breathing. And I'm like, oh, I get that. I totally get that. But for the fire service, we now do yoga in our academies, by the way, because we've found the benefit. But let me tell you, in the fire service, that takes 20 years for us to go, it's okay. So I guess my thought is it's kind of like Jim said, like super hard for us to be okay with being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Super hard, like kind of like pull our hair out hard. And then I go, hey, I get it. Maybe we don't have to really know what the ultimate goal is. And I think Alyssa said it here. You can dream big and be very lofty and be willing to learn to ask really big and trust the process. And I have another leadership thing, and we always tell our students, trust the process. You don't really know what the end goal is going to be. I do think with the Sound ACH, we did start bringing the community resource paramedics together, and that really started us to find a space that we could feel comfortable in talking about. And I think there's value of listening to other people, because there's things I've learned on here that I'm like, oh, I had no idea that we actually have a connection. But in the fire service, it takes us a long time to break out of our own little tribal group kind of group think. And so I guess what I leave with is that we get to really learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable and really dream big. And someone else said it in my group, then we get to translate that concept to our politicians, our commissioners, and our chiefs. And that's where the hard task is to actually explain what we're doing. There isn't really always an answer, right? So I guess I invite us all, Jim, you and me, to really be open to, we don't have the answer, we don't know where it's going to go, but we get to start making some changes. And for us, for y'all, the fire service can't bill for these services. So currently my fire service without a grant is paying for this extra work to get people places, but I can't bill for that in the state. And I know our goal is to figure out how we can self-fund this particular program. And that's going to take us working on at the state level. But I guess I get to learn to be uncomfortable living in the middle ground. Again, that word was liminal space. Got it this time, liminal space. And that just takes getting used to being a little more uncomfortable than I'm used to. So, so that's where we're at. Don't anybody be offended when I said woo-woo, because I mean that all up, right? I mean that.
God, if somebody would pay me to be woo-woo, I'd really.
I know it's not really woo, but in the fire service, that's exactly where the head goes. It's like you're talking about breathing and thinking about, I don't know, grounding or something, you know, right?
Yeah, and I guess the piece I would add, I still appreciate both you and Jim sharing those insights. When we got done with the call, or I guess as we were closing it up, what I recall is us saying, this is what a cohort would do, right? Because you all were talking about how every time you're successful, you're not getting reimbursed for something. Like basically your measure of success as a community resource paramedic, you're not taking somebody to the emergency department, therefore you're losing your station money. How do we have a conversation where you all get to say, this is the issue? How do we actually strategize and try and solve whatever the common issue was? And I think we had an aha moment of, oh, this is what being in a cohort, defined cohort, might be able to laser in on, so that we're not just talking about the global, but we actually start to bring people together who are working in concert and in common around some of those issues. And, I'm hoping that that's part of the reason that you signed the contract. But if it's all about yoga, that's okay too. I'm just, I just think that there's something that happened during that call where, again, our team learns, but it's really the opportunity that gets created when you have the ability to be problem solving and having thought partners with people who actually understand the issues that you face each day. And so just really appreciate you both kind of sharing your thoughts of at least that one conversation. It was really helpful for us and our team.
Thank you, Liz. I think that we can make some real progress. We have made real progress already, certainly here from the scope of the fire department serving a tribal nation. And I think one of the approaches that we could take, a cohort, if you want to call it that, or a rose of any other name, whatever, is to pair up people from the ACH who have a specific skill set that is applicable to our role, our goals. In other words, pairing me up with somebody who is an expert in access to basic childhood dentistry doesn't move us in a forward direction. However, pairing us up with someone who is, they understand how to get funding for access to Narcan kits, that helps us. I'm all in. I'm willing to put in the time, but only if we can make it an efficient use of that time. But ACH has done great work.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim and Nicole. I find myself just really appreciating all the voices that we've heard, and just, with the Star Trek metaphor, just how do we connect across differences, not only different levels of ambiguity, very disparate in some ways goals, but ultimately kind of discovering where there are some shared broader goals at a regional level. And, Yuki had spoken up. Liz, I don't know if, I think you'd had some conversations, also signed up for a cohort that's been around for a while and had some ideas around what this might look like in a new world, kind of as we transition post-Medicaid transformation. I don't know if it's worth just kind of bringing back your voice, Yuki, and your thoughts around kind of what the opportunity is with your previous, or where you are with your cohorts and what it might evolve to with in a little bit less prescriptive space.
Sure. I would say what we've done with the work groups that we've been a part of, so specifically the opioid work group and access to care, is we kind of were a beta for what we're talking about now, which is the collective action network. So as part of the Medicaid transformation, some of us, we signed up for these different work groups. And so in this particular work group, this access to care, we started talking about what are the gaps and how can we fill those gaps. And at the same time, Ideal Option has other sources of funding, and we had an opportunity to bring that funding to this example of addressing one of the issues. So we leveraged the funding to be able to provide transportation services to partner organizations for individuals with opioid use disorder who needed rides either home or to their recovery support services. So that was kind of a beta for this project of the group collectively identifying a problem, us coming forward with some funding that didn't come from the ACH, and then putting together a process and piloting it, like actually rolling it out within, I think we rolled it out within 8 weeks of deciding that we wanted to try this. So now taking that to the next level, it's, is this working, evaluating, should we use these funds in a different way, or how can we really support the different populations that might be accessing based on who is accessing it today, like taking those learnings. So that's a way that we can continue to create, collaborate, dream, about different ways of taking this work group model and kind of transitioning it, even though we kind of were the beta for what we're talking about right now.
Yeah. Thanks, Yuki. And so you imagine this group evolving into continuing to, what is a solution that we all care about?
Yeah, I would
depth to it.
Yeah. And then I would just add, as I was listening to the discussion we just had, is, we come across different funding sources and we can't apply for it because we're for profit. So having the space in these cohorts to identify these situations, and we are always going to our community partners and saying, hey, there's this opportunity. Do you want to apply for it? And we will help support, your efforts. But it's not always clear what those organizations want or need the money for. So having these cohort discussions to identify what are the solutions that we're searching for, or what are the things we want to try, and then also knowing what funding sources are available, we can say, hey, there's this opportunity, let's apply, or have a lead organization apply who is a nonprofit, and we will all deliver on whatever the solution is. I mean, that is what what we're talking about, of coming together, finding funding, delivering a solution, and being in action, and then evaluating it and deciding how we move forward.
Yeah. Well said. It seems like it's a nice model. I'm wondering, Nicole or Liz, you maybe just even put a finer point. I know there is a slide, so what does this look like? What Yuki's starting to describe, this cohort process, folks are starting to sign up for some. What are the options? What does it look like over the course of this year as we're all kind of wading into some new waters, new territory?
Nicole, do you want to describe the cohorts?
Sure. If Elizabeth wouldn't mind pulling up, trying to think of which slide it is, Elizabeth, that helps.
Yeah, or whether that visual. I don't know if they need Nika was going to. I don't know if it was you or Nika that was going to do that today, but
I think it's me. There we go. Okay. So what you're seeing on the screen are what we've been calling focus areas. and they're elements within the cohorts. And we got some nice feedback from a lot of folks, instead of having, and I think this sort of speaks to what Jim was saying also, of, you know, we also recognize we're in a space where staffing and capacity, we're all a little maxed out. So how do we look at creating sort of manageable commitments, but also keep that spirit of innovation, creativity, history? You know, honestly, you know, a lot of the things carrying forward did come from Medicaid transformation. And so what's not here, and just reminds me, we'll have to make another slide. So we have come to sort of what we're describing as 5 cohort areas. And the first cohort is within that equity cohort. And for those who have read a little bit detail into the contracts, you'll see that there is a minimum commitment for any partner wanting to participate in the collaborative action network. You're also committing to participate in the learning journey of the equity cohort. This is a lot of the same information that we've been over the last several years around racial justice, social justice, tribal and indigenous learning. We've added measurable well-being because there was a strong positive response of kind of transitioning from that. How do we measure how communities and individuals are thriving? And so really those areas are around equity. Vital conditions, I think, is an area that has emerged. I was going to say through COVID, but honestly, it's been a constant conversation with many of you of how can we do this work if we don't have humane housing, food security. Oh gosh, now I'm forgetting the third one, Liz. It'll come to me. Why can't I remember it? Okay. Workforce strategies.
Work.
Rocio, thank you. I knew you were going to chime in. Thank you. And meaningful work. So really these have emerged. We've had several learning sessions in 2021 that were focused on those to dig in. We had local experts, national experts, and connected some examples of what partners were doing around those. And so many of us were eager to lean in more of those areas. You know, it's almost, these vital conditions are the threads between a lot of these other project areas that we had been doing that had been more connected to practice transformation. And then we've I would say, saved some space. This might be our most innovative bucket cohort around emerging issues and looking at COVID long-term recovery, supporting young and emerging leaders. Okay, now I'm blanking again because I don't see it on my screen. Oh, sorry, emergency response and rural health issues. And so, you know, looking at these have continued to bubble up over the last couple of years, and there is energy within the region, within existing partners. And then, as Liz was saying, there's a queue of new organizations that have emerged throughout the last few years that also have value in adding and working with y'all on these sort of these other topics. And then we have what I would say is, if you think about like what's our paper trail of what we've learned in the last couple years with Medicaid transformation, the two other cohorts are practice transformation and then care coordination. There's still potential of a lot of innovation within those two cohorts, but it's also, I think, a testament of hearing from y'all of there's a lot of projects that are up in motion, and you didn't want to lose the momentum that we're going, that kind of scale and sustain was going on. And so that saves space. Still, innovation is there, creativity, but being people together to continue the work. And then overall, this is where our team is excited, and I'll probably put a plug too. You know, we're learning how to evolve and transition and be comfortable in this space. And so Monty, Stacy, and Elizabeth are also training up our team, coaching our team on how can we consistently support co-design, be action oriented, what does that look like? And so, our team is ready, excited to support the cohort development. There's a handful of organizations. I think if you were a person who participated in those contract meetings, you also knew that there was a hope that we would have organizations who would want to lead or co-lead cohorts, and there in fact are, which is very exciting. I think it fits that spirit of innovation and co-design when you have other organizations kind of helping on the infrastructure side of things. So that's sort of, these are the topics. There are, Liz, this is great. She's put little TBD honeycombs on there because, and I think we've heard throughout these contract meetings and then just conversations when folks have been asking about where we're going, pediatrics comes up. There's other topics when you bring people together that will emerge. And so there is space to add more focus areas to this work. And I would say not to spread us more thinner, but really to see if there's just a thread between some of these areas where collaboration can start working. So that's where we're at. We've been framing it, and some of you might have seen like a slide where we're trying to think of the work this year is on a quarterly basis. So Q1 is really around, we were able to give ourselves a little bit of breathing space, as we were calling it, because I don't think it's actually a good thing, but the healthcare authority was a little delayed in their decision, or maybe it wasn't really their decision. They were waiting for approval for this 6-year. And so that allowed us to sort of wait, because that meant we didn't have to do all new contracts, which for those of you in the contract world, that's a nice thing. And so we're doing amendments this year. And so Q1 is really from now until the end of March to get these contracts in place, answer questions, make sure y'all understand kind of the direction that we're heading, start to have later in March, bring these cohorts together. Sadly, virtually still, hopefully, I'm not going to jinx it, so I'm not going to say anything, but I hope we are physically together soon. And then second quarter, you'll all, for those that we have been sharing this, reporting is much narrow focus this year. We don't have to be held to the same reporting ourselves as the healthcare authority. So reporting looks a little different. So that Q2 we'll be looking at, I like to think of reporting. I'm a huge fan of evaluation and storytelling. And it really is, that's the aim for a lot of this, of like quality improvement, learning from one another. And so Q2 we'll look at some reporting, more convening. And then in Q3, we will most likely have our retreat again, which we've all enjoyed. Like I said, hope it's in person, but we'll see. And then, but then we'll be at the end of the year and we'll have another round of learning from each other. So that's sort of where we're at with the cohorts. And I'm happy. I think Liz, did she just have to hop off? Okay. I was trying to track the chat while I was chatting. So that's kind of what we've been describing in the contract meetings. Nika Osting has done an awesome job with there's a survey that has gone out that has a little bit more information on time commitment for cohort. But yeah, I think that's kind of all I've got to share, Monty, at this point.
Thanks, Nicole. And, recognizing that there's a number of folks who are going to have to get off in a couple minutes, just appreciate that. And I think several of us, and maybe you, Nicole, can stay on if folks have more questions, but just connecting the dots from, there is a new North Star. You all created that North Star around equitable well-being and around transforming systems that help everybody to thrive, which we know the systems right now were not designed to do that. And these cohorts are really the tip of the spear for kind of operating and moving into new space together. They're the kind of the first attempt of kind of realizing this co-creation process. And, it's going to be a little bit of some of you, let's reimagine a whole big system. And Jim, I so appreciate you giving voice to, hey, I need something that's really pragmatic that is adjacent to my work. And these cohorts, as Yuki suggested, are opportunities to say, let's make sure that these are meaningful. There's not as many hoops. Nobody else is, controlling the rules as much as right now for you all to say, how do we really do something that is worth showing up for? And, piloting, reimagining systems. And so I'm really excited about how you all might embrace and what that looks like in this next year. And the last thing I'll just say, if anybody else wants to reflect or stay on, is I think there's very few networks, regional networks in the country that could actually jump into this type of ambiguity and make the massive transition that you all are doing. And I think it's a lot because of the relationships and kind of what you all care about. So it's, some of the eyes of the country are really curious around how this ACH is really making some pretty radical shifts and what that might portend for all people in your region. So is Liz back, or did the captain abandon the ship?
Monty, I know you can't see all the chats because you're on your old iPad, but Catherine Howell had a good question of, will there be space for partner sharing on a regular basis, related events, trainings? And Meg, I'm going to put you on the spot just a little bit to talk about, we do have a virtual space that is pretty exciting, that builds upon, a resource that I've been using, I think since I started my public health career 18 years ago. So Community Commons platform, we've been leveraging, and my CHA chip processes have just benefited from that resource. And we've been able to leverage what they've learned from Community Commons and create that as a learning a learning space. And I think, Meg, are we calling it our library? I'm going to stop talking and then let you describe it, because you can describe it better than I do.
I hope so. So we wanted to keep it simple though. So we're calling it our resource library. I did put our link, the North Sound library, in the chat. And then Stacy also added the main site in which we are partnering with. So our resource library is going to be able to take advantage of this national resource where they collect articles, podcasts, videos, all sorts of types of ways to share and learn information. And then we pull from that. And then we're also going to be curating our own, collections. And that's where really the cohorts are going to come in. So we will have another open office hour, I think in April. So now that I've said it out loud, I feel like I'm holding myself to that, where we want to really dive into that with all of our partners to make sure they understand just how we hope that the library will work into your work with the cohorts, but really also just as a reintroduction of anybody goes to this site and can look up, I'm curious about this concept, I'm curious about I need more information on this, that this is going to be the place for that for all of you. It's going to be public, no passwords or anything needed. So you can share it out to people you work with, people you come in contact with. So please check it out now. It is live. And I think it looks kind of small, but it's because once the cohorts start meeting, it's going to grow, because we're going to be able to get all of the knowledge that you all have and put it into the library. So definitely more to come the first half of this year, but please feel free to check that out. There's even a way for you to submit resources right now on that main page, but you can also contact us if you have any questions at any time. Our contact information is also on the site. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Meg. And I know we're kind of at that time, so just, want to acknowledge and appreciate folks for not just showing up today, but showing up for, the beginning of this journey. I think it's going to be a really fascinating opportunity to co-create this year. And hopefully, if you heard anything, felt prompted to follow up with staff around the surveys, cohorts, who to contact, and really be thinking about how you might want to participate and move some of this work forward. So some of us will stay on the line if you want to stay on, but just wanted to give folks a chance to get on with their day. And so appreciate you being with all of us on the journey together.
Thanks, Monty. And like Monty said, we can stay on. I see Mike and Amanda have some questions in the chat, and we're happy to do those. But those of you who are leaving, thank you. It was so nice to see all your faces, and we will be in touch with many of you soon. All right. So, Mike, if you're gonna hang on, I see your face.
Hang on. Yeah.
Okay. So, I believe yes, and I'll tell you, with quality improvement, we did a couple sessions with having, and it was part of the community initiatives team with results-based accountability,
Right.
and that being an approach that works for QI in public health, human services, and social services. And so within measuring equitable well-being, there's an area that I think that fits nicely in. I think also reporting is a piece of quality improvement. And Nika and I have been looking at like the questions that stick around. We're always designed in reporting to be a bit of a quality improvement prompt questions. And so, but I would also say, similar to this year, this is a co-design process. So if folks need to continue, like quality improvement is another one of those TBD topics. Results-based accountability, which for those of you know is becoming increasingly popular when used with targeted universalism also. So I think we are real fortunate to have access to some experts that we can bring back. And it does look like, I know Whatcom County Health Department uses RBA. Island County for their community health assessment is interested in RBA too. So there's remains to be interest in it. So I think it's definitely a possibility.
I know for us, it's probably the relationship with North Sound and reporting that we started looking at quality improvement. And I know the medical arena is pretty steeped in this, and social and human services are not always to the same degree. And one of the models, based on doing some research, was Plan, Do, Say, Act, which we've started to use. And you can use it on a micro level. You can use it on a given process or a particular aspect, and found that useful. But it was really from our relationship with you all and being pushed in the oral health LIN and that cohort to look at individual processes and ways along the way. So it's been fruitful in the past, and I didn't see that specifically on there. So, but I'm excited that there'll be opportunities. And that's an area I think that we get, Jim, I know you've been curious, what do we get for opportunity? Because that was something that we received kind of from expertise from North Sound and other partners, but we're still students in it. So we're hungry for more. So excited that that'll be on offer.
I was just gonna add to that. Sorry to step away for a minute, but I think one of the interesting things that we're noticing in this space, there's a lot of quality and process improvement, systems transformation work that's trying to make this work much more accessible and streamlined. And I think some of the earlier PDSA work that came out of groups like IHI that we partner a lot with is trying to make this more applicable and broader social settings with social problems that doesn't kind of get too caught up in kind of the nth degree around certain metrics and kind of the incremental pieces. And so it'd be interesting to learn. And I think, Nicole, we've talked a little bit around how that capability can be built into some of the cohorts, just as Yuki's suggesting, where there could be some really short cycle change, that there might be a common kind of a signature style for the cohorts to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And Amanda's got a question here. Remind us when ACH will assign cohorts and when we could start meeting with the cohorts. So aim is by the end of March to have completed. So we've got 5 cohorts that though we've met. And the assignment of the cohorts is really based upon what you all pick to participate. We're not gonna, if you want to participate in a cohort, you get to be assigned to that cohort. We're not going to dictate that for you. So it's really, we hope we've encouraged like thinking about your own capacity, existing projects, but if you've committed to that in the survey and that it's been shaping your contract, then that's the cohort. Then you're in. That's what I'm saying.
Will you guys be sending out the end product of that survey that we submitted, like as a reminder
December.
of what
sure.
we
Yeah.
do? And
I guess one of my other questions too is if in that survey we said, oh yeah, I think I can do this, that, and the other thing, what if at some point we're like, this is actually a little bit more than what we're capable of, or it wasn't what I had thought originally. How can we gracefully step down levels, I guess?
Yeah.
Needed.
So similar to how we've done in the past, we can do an amendment and change commitments. And then on the flip side, we can, if you find yourself in a wonderful space where you, I don't know, you got new funding for something and would like to expand or add things, that is also a possibility. So it's a simple amendment change.
I guess also too, I look at the things that I'm interested for our organization, and I look at the 5 categories and I can see us fitting into many of those categories, not 100%, but aspects of them. And so, so when I took the survey, I thought, oh yeah, I'm interested in this. I want to learn more. I want to incorporate more. But if that was the wrong approach, that would be important to know. Or if it's, I have one main focus area and some of those aspects in the other cohorts will also be able to talk about those and incorporate those aspects into the one focus area, if that's, maybe I'm worrying too much about, like, I don't know.
That's that space, right? We're in the space. It's okay to be, I mean, our team has been feeling that as well, of like the anticipation of where we're going, what it's going to look like. I think maybe what I could say is, you know, our hope is, because with the resource library, ongoing communication of learning sessions that can be open to anyone, you know, it really comes down to those 3 levels. You know, are you at a 1 or a 2? And if you need to change and go from a 2 to a 1, and for those of you who, I'm kind of speaking contract language right now, but 1 is really your you're listening to learning sessions. 2, you've got some internal projects that are directly related to the cohort, like a cohort work focus area. And 3, you're actually leading or co-leading a cohort with the ACH team. So our hope is that we've created a space within the library. If you're just interested, I'm going to make up something right now, of rural health or youth empowerment, and you'd like to understand what some other partners are doing in our region, that's the space of the library for those who have just an interest, a higher level interest, so that kind of allow you to self-select how far you can lean into some of these areas. And I think if we've learned anything, is we have to be flexible, and we are trying to build upon that flexibility of, we call it like a both and approach. You've got the resource library, all that level of information, resources that are coming from partners that they're utilizing, success stories that they want to share. And then you've got the cohorts that might be going in, if you've got that level 2 and you're doing collective work together. So, you know, we're learning too. We are tapping into the models that community initiatives has seen that have worked in other communities, but we're definitely still, like, we're learning right alongside y'all. And similar to how some of the Medicaid transfer, we might have some missteps and we might have some awesome opportunities that are moving forward, but trying to build it with you all is the difference from last year, where we don't have that prescribed toolkit that we had to implement certain evidence-based models and they had to be done this way. That there's flexibility this time around, and that causes a little bit of angst, I think, sometimes. So but we're in it with you this time. We're not having to track as many of the, I mean, I love an evidence-based model. I love community-based models. I love new models. I love blending models together. And that's the space we're kind of in now.
I have one more question about Liz had talked about that there are some agencies waiting to become partners with the ACH, and are those agencies also part of this meeting today, or will, like, how is it possible to know who those agencies are?
Eventually, yeah, it's funny. I think I was just chatting this to Nika of like, what is our process of there's many of them have been involved in like community health worker work on the ground. A lot of have been in result of some of the COVID recovery funding. We don't have a list of them, and they weren't there. The hope was to get those who had existing contracts in place, get you all up to speed on where we're headed, kind of have a stronger foundation, then invite those newer partners to the table. So a lot of them are very community-based organizations. And, you know, the ACH had connection, like, we have a strong foundation, so it's adding a bit more of those community-based, community resource centers, promotoras programs, and those school districts also could be a potential new partner. So, but yeah, it's not supposed to be a mystery. It's just trying to get these contracts done first, and then opening it up to kind of this, I don't know what we call it, phase 2. I think that's what we have been saying, phase 2. And there are a handful who are very interested in the care coordination piece of it as well. And so some of them are in, like, that's their sector.
I'm just curious because, like, Jim, when you were talking earlier about like, how do we really fit? I'm kind of feeling that way too, even though I've been partners, for 2 years, I think now. I'm still trying to figure out kind of where we fit, but my hope is that we are fitting into a category all of our own. And so that's why I'm pretty curious about who are the other potential partners, because are they the people that I've been talking to behind the scenes? And I just don't know that they're also talking to you too.
I have the same question too. If we move forward in this cohort, maybe even presumably leading a cohort as it pertains to community paramedicine or mobile integrated health, or however it was titled, who's going to be my partners? Who's helping? Because ultimately, I need someone who has a skill set that's germane to what we're actually doing. So can you answer that? Like, how do you distill down the partners into these cohorts? Is it just predicated on them saying, I'll do it, I'll be in this cohort? Is there another process? Which I think is what Amanda was kind of also getting at.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I mean, for the first round, it's the known partners who've been committed to those work areas, and that helps us figure out who's one from the past groups, who's wanting to move forward in this new kind of cohort model. That's one way to do it. The other way is these known partners that have emerged, I think, from our standpoint, from disaster response, so COVID response and flood response has emerged a handful, very much. I think, Amanda, it's more of those care coordination groups that have emerged. And then truly, I think we've also, the third, and maybe Jim and Amanda, this is where it would be the most beneficial, is it's recommendations, or it's organizations that you are working with who you would want us to pull in. And I think, you know, Jim, we've been working with Health Commons for Learn to Return, but they also support a lot of stuff in Puget, in like King County and Puget Sound for community paramedicine work. And so if they're a partner, we need to more intentionally pull in for funding purposes. You know, partner recommendations is what I would say is going to be our strong, like within the cohorts, like, do we need to extend and invite additional folks that aren't on our radar? So I think that's that third one. And yeah,
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I would also, if I may ask, because of course and maybe it's just me, I still don't quite fully grasp how the cohort model is going to flesh out. From as far as I can tell, it seems as if you're in a higher level of participation in that particular cohort, that you're going to be shaping not only the structure of the cohort, but the metrics of success. Am I wrong?
I'd say that the metrics of the success and the scope of collaborative work. And so there's a learning element to it that is sort of foundational to all of the cohorts. And then the work is the collaborative co-design. Like, how are you bringing together? So it's like, let's do mobile integrated health as an example. Those who are at the table, what are they deciding? If you're going to work on changing reimbursement for the community paramedicine model, what does that look like? How do we tap into what resources do you all need to enable that type of work? And so it will be, that's perhaps that leap of faith. It will depend on who is at the table and who thinks this model will work for them. And so I think, Monty, that's a space that many community groups are in, because it does depend on who shows up. Our hope is by adding some of these other care coordination groups, and I apologize, I'm being very care coordination specific right now, but I think that with mobile integrated health and, supporting, Amanda, your work with supporting children and the school districts, that network is really important. And so, but we are at a bit of it's not a mystery so much, because there are some knowns here, but it does depend if there's some additional partners we need to invite to the table. And I also keep it open too, is it's okay to have meetings where, when we've done this for the last few years, people might not be, quote, like Sound ACH partners. Doesn't mean they can't attend a meeting. It doesn't mean we can't have some working sessions with them too. So that's also, I think that's a spirit of co-design too. They don't necessarily, that would be a big ask for somebody who's never known an ACH to come to this table, look through. And the way that Nicole Picknell was describing it was fantastic. Like, if that's, they're going to need to warm up to an ACH model before they kind of commit. But I think we're very open to inviting outside partners who potentially aren't within the collaborative network to the table to help drive the network. That is a model. I've experienced that with other past work that I've done with the Whatcom County Health Department. But yeah,
it sounds like at the first cohort meeting, that's probably the first question that is asked of the group, of who else needs to be at the table.
I 100% agree, Amanda. Yeah.
And I just slightly add up, these groups are all going to look a little different depending on the initial scope of work and what's happened. But, what we've seen work sometimes is, really figuring out where there is some energy to move something forward. What is it to just get the ball rolling on some of these broad areas? And that depends a little bit on who is showing up, and making sure that there's room for some other perspectives. But we've seen a lot of cohorts that are leveraging local partners and also bringing in some other ideas and expertise from other parts of the country. So I think we're imagining that these cohorts might, if you all are doing some work around, equitable changes in your food systems and procurement policies, you might want to bring in some other folks as part of your cohort that can talk about what that has looked like and what are some tools and examples and policies and practices, as well as, what are the really amazing things that are already happening in the region. So I think there's a little bit of what's most needed to really move some of these ideas forward, whether they're big regional basis or, smaller pilots.
I think I've shared this question before, but I don't remember what group. I'm sorry if it's a duplicate. But one of my other concerns about this is we all show up to the cohort the first day, and we are all there because we have a similar goal within our community. And I'll be specific. So my goal is really focused on the Skagit community, working with young children, and the providers that we typically work with within the Skagit community, and how we can enhance what our community has. And so yes, I think we can learn from other communities like Whatcom or Snohomish, but if they're in the same cohort, are we now then competing for what might be potential funding to make a system in Skagit better versus, now we have to, pick a project depending on what county is trying to focus on, different projects. So I don't know if I said that well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I definitely can relate, having been pretty county focused for most of my career. I think what the shift with this is that there in essence should be room for both. So there should be space of a participation in this approach covers sort of the staffing cost, if you will, of what it takes to participate in meetings and things like that. The collective action of, bringing Skagit specific partners together or finding funding sources. I mean, it doesn't help the system to water down the funding, and I totally understand that. And so I think it speaks to what was Monty saying of like it will continue to depend who comes to the table, but there are, I would say, regionally focused organizations beyond the ACH that can also be of support to specific counties. So you kind of have to do, if I've learned anything, like you got to do kind of a both and if we look for state funding there's got to be local support, perhaps regional support, regional control. I mean, there's a model there that I'm hopeful can work. And I kind of think about like with some of our care coordination models, like we've got state funding. It can go to an individual county, but it can also go to individual organizations. And so if we try to think of like, what is the funding model needed in order to do this work, we're not doing anybody a favor if we've created a system that's competition for one another. And so, I think of a lot of this work is underfunded. So what are our options? And we do have, maybe we've not been explicit, but we do have growing partnerships with foundations and sort of these, oh God, what's the right term? It's not I'm forgetting it. Basically the funding that's not like Department of Health funding, where you have to be so specific in how you use the funding.
Unrestricted funding.
Thank you, man. Yes, unrestricted funding. So from more philanthropy groups, because honestly, with the work that we've been doing with the flooding, it's unrestricted funding that has made such a huge difference. And so working with local foundations, community benefit boards with hospitals and those types of things. So that's another, funding obviously drives a lot of this work. Reimbursement drives a lot of this work. We still have the managed care organizations, sort of, it's an interesting relationship, but we still have them at the table of what that type of funding looks like as well.
Okay.
And Nicole, while we're on the subject of funding, and it always comes across as distasteful for me to bring it up, but of course, to our Board of Commissioners, they want to know, particularly during the worst global health crisis in the last 100 years, why I'm spending so much time participating with the ACH. And I want to say, well, because they're going to financially support a lot of the endeavors that we've already put in place and that we're going to sustain. Which we would do regardless of the funding, but that gives them, and it gives the fire chief a very tangible, tit for tat. So that funding model, what is the amount of funding that each specific entity, Tulalip Bay Fire Department, how is that financial distribution predicated? Is it on the measures of success that we set up? But we've had these great strides in the last couple of years here on the reservation. We're going to continue on with those. Is that going to be a continued source of financial funding from the ACH from this project? Do I understand that correctly?
So let me start. you're not the first organization who both needs that in order to kind of finalize the commitment. So you're not alone in it. I don't have a total dollar amount at the moment, because what it does depend on is the pool of partners who are wanting to participate. So if we have, and I don't think it's necessary, if we have less organization participating, that would increase sort of that helps our formula. What I can share is the level of commitment. So if you're a level 1, participating, you're at the equity, you're participating in the learning journey of that, there's a set amount of money for that. If you're in the tier 2, that increases the amount of funding, because that means you've committed to some staff and we would like to support your staffing for that. Level 3, you're taking on a cohort, going to lead that cohort, that also need some capacity funds for that. So the tiers, there's a formula for the tiers. What we don't have is the total dollar amount. And part of that is because we still are waiting to hear from the healthcare authority on what their total dollar amount. I can tell you, for the healthcare authority, while I said it's not as prescribed as it was in the past, they are focused on equity, which it's very general, which maybe is a good thing for us at this point, care coordination, and then COVID recovery in general. That could be a really good thing for those organizations that are supporting those bodies of work. And it also allows us to figure out, like, what is our funding pool? I think you might have seen, like, we're also an ACH that has never spent down every ounce of our Medicaid work. We did more of a plateau model, but it is dependent on how many organizations are participating in that. I think,
Right.
and it's unsatisfying to me. It's unsatisfying to the staff.
No,
But we're
I
getting
get
closer.
that. Yeah, I get it. That's reasonable. And I know that you don't know how much it is, but of course the direction that I would move our agency forward in a lot of these endeavors would hinge on the funding of increasing that capacity. In other words, if I have another CRP that I want to send into an area of the reservation to really focus on maybe fentanyl interdiction, and I need that maybe part-time hours, maybe it's overtime from one of our veteran medics, I need to be able to kind of forecast, of course, can I afford to do that? And that's why I asked that question. And the last question I'll ask, and then I have to head out, is one of the issues that I guess that one of the things I took issue with, I guess, with the ACH was that it was sort of using a shotgun to shoot a fly as far as the broad application of ideas, and they didn't really fit with community paramedicine. And yet community paramedicine in and of itself had the greatest impact on, say, take for example, reducing the overutilization in the emergency department. So my question is, we have reduced the number of ER admissions on the reservation, but working on the reservation is a very unique environment. And I'm very passionate about it. I'm an aggressive advocate for the Tulalip reservation, but make no mistake that the paradigm in which I work is wildly different than it is in the greater Snohomish County area. The resources that I have available to me are wildly different. So take for example, Nicole's program that she works for down in South Snohomish County, if we're in the same cohort, it's not a fair game. We're on different playing fields. And are we going to be able to take in those differences into account as far as the measures of success for each of those programs? Did I explain that right?
Maybe I'll ask a question. Is there a concern that if you don't meet these measures that funding will be impacted? Is that I'm reading
part of it.
Okay.
No, I think the greater issue is meeting measures of success that are totally irrelevant to the Indian reservation. In other words, if one of the measures of success is, well, we need to get these patients from going to Providence Hospital and instead have them go to Swedish Mill Creek, which is a walk-in, non-urgent, facility. Well, I can't have tribal members go to Mill Creek. So I could not meet that measure of success. Whereas Nicole's program, which is right adjacent to that facility, could easily meet that. Does that kind of explain it?
Yeah, it does. And I think maybe I can't speak of this with 100% certainty, but if I understand sort of the direction we are trying to head, is also one of the things we wanted to do with this switching from like very heavily focused Medicaid transformation, needing these numbers, earning these dollars, was that some of the metrics of success, like you're saying, Jim, it doesn't help the actual programs who are doing the work, or it's not the true measurement of success, or it doesn't allow for that targeted universalism, which is the concept that it takes different approaches to get to sort of universal goals. So if I don't see our organization shifting away and sort of, penalizing is not even the right term, but like limiting funding to organizations who take a different approach because you know best for your community. And so I don't envision us having metrics of success that would dictate the funding. This is still very much piloting models, trying to think outside of the box. So, we're trying to move away from that. Measuring vital conditions and well-being is more of a movement of trying to measure what the whole person cares, spiritual, emotional, physical, those types of things. So that's kind of where we've gone with the target universalism. But I hear you on like, it will take, Nicole's a great example, a different model, different outcomes, different paths to sort of, what you all are trying to achieve, but that's not the direction I think we're heading back to, if that makes any sense.
It does, and
Okay.
that makes me optimistic. And at the same time, I have got to depart.
Okay.
Thank you, and but I would like to continue the conversation a little bit somehow in the near future.
Yeah.
Okay.
Happy
All right.
to do
Thank
that.
you.
Okay.
Take care, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Amanda, do you have any more questions?
I guess maybe it kind of built off of what he just brought up. So there's a lot of conversation about the equity, care coordination, so I'll focus on that. And I guess and this might be where Jim was going to, but I worry that especially when it talks about like tribal learning, all that, where if the tribe has services that we provide for the majority of the community, and the tribe has services that support the kids in their community. Like, I can do all kinds of things to invite them in or try to partner with them, but really, is that something that the tribe even wants? And so I fear that, we're not going to meet like the equity standard in that cohort, simply because the tribe has a system to meet the services that I provide for everybody off the tribe. Mm-hmm. And so how, like, when you say something about the focus of the equity and funding for that, like, are they looking at all of equity everywhere across all aspects? Or, because I guess when I just see tribal, I see like, oh, that's the focus, or LGBTQ, just all of the things. I'm like, we working with kids, we don't necessarily go into those types of services. Mm-hmm. And it's not something we're trained. Our staff are special education teachers and speech pathologists, and people wouldn't come to us for those types of services. However, we are trained in equity and culture and all. So like, if mom and dad identify with any group, that, and they want to share that, that's great. And if they have concerns, we will refer, do what's needed best for that family. But my fear is that when that's not our expertise, will we be dinged and therefore not given as much because it's just not highlighted. It's not in bold, like, hey, this is what we do. Like what we do is very specific, and yes, that's very specific to all groups, or can be to all groups, but our focus is that early learning, developmental disability type of service. And so I guess, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think so. Here's where I hear really good things that you just stated. So the equity cohort, it's, if you can think of it still as it's learning. And you said some great words of, the tribe has their own programs. Amanda, some people don't know that. Some people have never even stepped foot on a reservation and they don't even know where they are. They have no sense of Indian health system. And so for me, there's no dinging in a learning journey. And the equity and tribal indigenous is really to emphasize that we have 8 tribal nations in this region, and we need to understand those so that you can approach this work. It's more of that, like how you step into the space of the work. If you had clients, if the mom was Snohomish, or if the dad Upper Scat, you would have a sense of, oh, I understand how that kind of works. These are the services we provide. And so for us, there's anytime with this equity or tribal learning journey, there's a bit of a baseline we're trying to get to. When I hear you already speak, you're already at a higher level of a baseline of just understanding of sovereignty. One of the things that we are excited, and Michaela and we're excited about, is just there are small things that go a long way in being in an ally to indigenous communities. Of we're getting pediatric books that speak about, like, the beautiful myth, the stories of tribes from our region, and having art on the wall, and supporting local businesses, tribal businesses for your staff and things like that. So there's no, in the equity and any of this tribal learning, there's no penalties, but showing up is what we're hopeful, like showing up, being open, trying to figure out how to implement some of the things. That's what we're looking for. But we're being real flexible this year with the cohort design, because it's a new concept. And we are going to have to learn from, where's the integration perhaps within equity, within care coordination, where are those opportunities? So, but truly, there's not a penalty model in this. We've not once said that. There's your commitment, and then our commitment to you with funding to support some of the capacity that you've committed to. That's where we're going with this cohort model.
Okay.
And
that helps me better understand, because I feel like, we're doing equity work regardless if we're part of that cohort on any level, right? And so, okay, that makes sense, I think.
Okay. And if it does, and it's funny, Nika had to hop off, but she said, I'm going to follow up with Amanda and walk her through. So we're happy to have one-on-one, and we expect that too. I know you all joined a few years after the first group that joined, and I think it's just Heather and I were the first staff who we did one-on-one meetings we did one-on-one meetings, pre-contract, one-on-one meetings after, just so people really have a good sense. And like I'm hoping I'm sharing this too, is we're getting trained up by Monty's team too on how to do this. And so this is a new model for some of us. We've done coalition building, but this like co-design it's really important to make sure you get it right in the beginning. So we're trying to be thoughtful in that. So we probably don't have everything to share with you yet of how we're going to go about it, because we're still learning, but we're more than willing to meet one-on-one with like folks, and just these are everything you have asked me. I'm like, oh, these are all like frequently asked questions that there's granted 10 other organizations kind of thinking about the same thing. So it's really helpful for us. And I'm just so excited how many staff people stayed on here, because you all get to hear of like, especially I see Natalie and Meg, who are our communications team. So we can do these frequently asked questions, because anything new, we got to ask questions. And so
I do have one, always ask questions.
Yeah.
I have one more question. So we just went through an audit,
Mhm.
and we also have a new financial person, and they're like, what's this ACH deposit? Like, I'm like, oh yeah, we met the criteria, or I don't even remember what it was. We did our commitment. And so that's just a payment that we received. And they're like, what does that mean? Like it's foreign to them. Like, what do you mean a payment? And what is this for? And so like, I'm wondering if when agencies receive payments, if there could also be an official letter that we can have for our files, so that when we are audited, the auditors are like, oh, okay, that makes sense now, rather than us just saying, oh yeah, it's this thing this is partnership that we have that.
Yeah.
And so if that's an option.
Yeah, I will pass that. I think we have done that before. So Cassie is our financial, or our accountant. I can ask her. This has come up before, and so I'll tag it again. And if that is something that would be helpful, we would. I can't see that being a problem.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for hanging on. And I'm gonna stop. Or no, I can't. Natalie, you'll have to stop the recording.